Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel and thanks for logging on. Today, we're discussing the Jaeger-LeCoultre Documetre Chronograph, 18 karat rose gold, 42 millimeters. This dual drivetrain Foudroyant chronograph can be seen and purchased on our website. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you enjoy these videos, and please click on the card in the upper right hand corner of the screen at any time during this video to see our full sales listing for this watch with additional accessories included in the sale, high resolution images for your desktop, and naturally complete pricing details for this Duometre chronograph. Now the chronograph version came out in 2007. And in many ways, it was the realization of a concept pioneered in the late 19th century to feature two drivetrains, two mainspring barrels, and two separate functions within a watch regulated by a single balance and escapement, the idea being you would avoid the loss of amplitude and diminished power reserve conventionally caused by having a complicated watch with two separate and concurrent functions in operation. So the watch does feature that unique dual wing movement, but it also has tremendous wrist presence on the dial side. Now, I do own this watch in white gold. It's the black dial white gold chronograph model, and the fit is familiar to me. 42 millimeters across the round of the case, not inclusive of the crown. It's not as thick as you might expect, 13.8 millimeters with a generously domed bezel and sapphire. And from lug to lug, the watch is large but not oversized at 50.3 millimeters across the wrist. I believe you could wear this watch on a wrist as small as 14.5 to 15 centimeters in circumference, the lower end of that scale if your wrist is more oval than round. It has an impressive heft to it. I should mention, over the years, the Duometre series has been delivered with a number of different buckles, either deployant or pin buckles. More recently, we've seen the pin buckles. Mine's on a deployant, but mine's also a limited series. A handsome, beautifully beveled and polished piece, makes for easy adjustment on the fly, and it's matched to a generously bolstered small-scale alligator leather in a medium brown with a monotone stitch and a folded edge. A very supple calfskin on the underside. I've always felt that Jaeger-LeCoultre specifies a somewhat higher grade strap on the Duometre series. Whenever I hold them in the hand or wear them on the wrist, I feel like I'm experiencing an appointment that is a cut above what you find on the general production Master and Reverso models. Now, the case is still incredibly handsome and sophisticated. You can see the combination of the satin finish as well as the polish for dramatic contrast, but you'll also note some subtleties such as the soldered lugs. They're double finished, polished on the flank and satin on the case band. There's a dramatic step between the two when they're soldered or welded on. Hand finishing is then necessary to remove any evidence of the joint between the two, that is, evidence of the weld. So the finishing at the end is very precise and very impressive. The standard of finish within and without this watch sets the mark for the Jaeger-LeCoultre manufacturer as a whole. Now, moving in across the later version bezel, the somewhat domed rather than conical bezel, you can see the dial is open to allow appreciation of the works beneath, as well as skeletonized power reserve displays at 7 o'clock and 5 o'clock, showing the chronograph power reserve, and we may as well start it up. It's that small blue hand, almost invisible against the backdrop of the movement, and then you'll note just below the time, there is a separate power reserve scale for the civil time. Very few chronograph watches feature both center civil time seconds and chronograph seconds, but you have that here, the gold hand denoting the time of day and the blue hand related to the chronograph itself. A Foudroyant flying seconds measuring down to 1/6 of a second at 6 o'clock, and of course you can see how you can stop the chronograph and then read the hours and minutes on the mono counter with superimposed hands at 2 o'clock. You read the seconds and then you read the sixths of seconds. Of course, being a mono pusher, once you stop it, you must reset it. You can't resume. All the same, it packs considerable visual fireworks. Now, the dial itself features different textures and planes. It's complex with the cutouts as well as the different scales for the time and the chronograph. And you'll note there is a very slight pebbled grain to this silver metallic dial. It has a little bit of a sort of sandpaper texture to it. It's easier to see in person, but it's quite beautiful. You'll also note refinement is unending with this watch, as the crown features irregular coining along its flanks to make it easier to grip and more substantial in the fingers. Little steps like that set this watch apart from almost anything else that Jaeger-LeCoultre makes, with a vintage-style lozenge pusher that nicely features a camber of its own, so it's rounded off, beautifully polished. The case back allows you to get a better look at the caliber 380. Now this is labeled 380, but it should be properly called the 380A, as it was when the skeleton dial version first came out, because it dispenses with the individual minutes disc that was present on the original caliber 380. That's dispensed with here to make for a simplified reading of the dial, as well as simplification of the movement to allow the cutouts, especially the one at 5 o'clock. So this is the 380A, but in every other respect, it's decorated and specified as the 380 was, which is to say you can see the twin mainspring barrels. Now you wind the crown in different directions to energize them. The ratchets allow one to essentially freewheel while the other winds. And because there is a decoupling system, you cannot accidentally overwind this manual wind Duometre, a rarity among manual wind optigamme timepieces, but a nice safety feature. All of the bridges are executed in what's known as Maillechort, or German silver. I've always felt this watch looks outside and inside like a Longa, and not just because of the material used, although that certainly advances the cause. You can see that the bridges and the plates are all a sort of golden hue as opposed to the blinding silvered rhodium finish of, for instance, Patek Philippe or Vacheron Constantin, and that's because this is designed to achieve the look of a 19th century pocket watch, specifically the Victorin Piguet-based pocket watches that Jaeger-LeCoultre constructed using a double mainspring barrel and a double drivetrain in the 1880s. Now the twin trains drive the two different complications. I may as well show you how this works. You can see the column wheel with 4 crenellated towers, as it is a mono pusher rather than the customary 8. You can see it interacting with the levers to set, start, stop, and reset. You'll also note that it's an easy movement to look into. Manually wound, it's almost like a deep forest of metal with different tones: blue, gold, violet, silver. It's quite pleasing, and it features a unique rayon coat across the bridges that basically emanates from an imaginary center point at the center of the balance staff. You'll note it's free sprung with a 21,600 vibration per hour beat rate, and when the complication is in operation, the watch can operate for 50 hours. When the complication is not operating, the watch can operate for 50 hours, which is to say there's no loss of power reserve because of the twin individual power reserves for separate functions of the watch. So the timepiece is beautifully executed. There is hand finishing, and you can see the mirrored anglage about the edge of every individual bridge, as well as the mirrored circumference of every screw and jewel countersink. The timepiece remains singular. Yes, there are other twin power reserve parallel function timepieces on the market these days, most notably the new IWC Tribute to Paul Weber or the Zenith Defy El Primero 21, but this was a real breakthrough piece. In 2007, a trailblazer at least a decade ahead of the industry, and quite frankly, more beautifully finished than any of those pretenders to the crown. This is a watch that's both historically significant and an absolute ball to own and wear. You can see it, and you can own this one on our website.